The check came to $47.80. I know because I still have the receipt. Tucked between the pages of the journal I started keeping the week after the lawsuit was filed. $47.80. The price of 4 pancake stacks, 2 orange juices, a kid's hot chocolate, and black coffee for the table. A family of 4. A Sunday morning. And one police officer who walked in, looked at them, and decided they didn't belong in my restaurant. By the time everything was settled in court 2 years later, that $47 breakfast had cost the city of Lakewood a check for $2,300,000. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me tell you how it actually started. I'd owned Hayes's Diner for 11 years by then. My mother had run the place before me for 23, and before her, my grandmother had built it from a lunch counter with 4 stools and a portable griddle into a proper sit-down establishment, with checkered floors and vinyl booths that had seen 3 generations of regulars. The diner sat at the corner of Maple and 5th in Lakewood. Not a fancy part of town, but a good one. The kind of neighborhood where people knew your order before they asked, where the coffee was never fancy but always hot, and where a Sunday morning felt like the whole community exhaled at once. I loved those Sunday mornings more than I could say. I was usually in by 5:30, long before my first cook Danny arrived at 6. I'd stand in the empty kitchen, the fluorescent light humming, the smell of yesterday's grease and fresh cleaning solution mixing into something that, to me, smelled entirely like home. I'd start the first pot of coffee and do what my grandmother called reading the room, walking through the dining area, straightening the sugar dispensers, checking the napkin holders, touching the back of each booth the way you might touch the shoulder of a friend you hadn't seen in a while. There was a crack in the vinyl of booth 7 that I'd been meaning to patch for years. I never did. It became a landmark. By 7:30 on a good Sunday, every booth was turning over. Old Mr. Patterson, booth 3, always asked for his eggs barely awake. The Kowalski twins, grown men in their 40s who still came in together every Sunday, split a single stack of pancakes and pretended it was for the budget, though I suspected it was just habit from when they were kids. My waitress, Renee, had been with me for 9 years and could carry 4 full plates and a milkshake on one arm while narrating the plot of whatever she was watching on television. She kept the whole dining room feeling like a kitchen table, which was exactly the point. Officer Keith Morrison had been coming into the diner for about 2 years before any of this happened. He wasn't a regular in the warm sense of the word. He was a regular the way a loose floorboard is a regular part of your morning, something you step around without thinking. He always sat at the counter, always ordered black coffee and a short stack, always paid exact change, and always left without saying thank you. I didn't think much of it. Plenty of people ate in silence. Not everyone needed conversation with their pancakes. But there was something about the way he moved through the space. He would scan the room when he walked in. Not the casual glance of someone looking for a seat, but something more deliberate. His eyes would pause on certain tables, certain customers. I noticed it the way you notice a draft in a room without being able to identify the source. A small discomfort that you explained away and then forgot. Until the next time. The first time I felt it consciously was on a Saturday in October, 3 months before everything happened. A young black couple had been seated in booth 5, a woman in a yellow coat and her boyfriend, both of them laughing at something on her phone. Morrison had walked in, stood at the counter for his coffee, and looked at them for a long moment. Not a glance, a look. I had a plate in my hand, and I set it down, watching him. Then he turned back to his coffee, and I told myself I was projecting, that I was imagining something that wasn't there. I told myself that a lot, I realized later. It became a kind of discipline, the discipline of not seeing what I was seeing. In November, Renee mentioned it to me without framing it as a complaint. She just said, in the way she said everything, between 2 bites of her own lunch behind the counter, "You know, every time Morrison's in here and there's a black customer, he always ends up asking me something. Like who they are, or do I know them?" She said it with her eyebrows raised, the way she raised them when she was waiting for me to agree that something was strange. I said something vague about how he was a cop and probably just being observant. Renee gave me a long, flat look and went back to her sandwich. I could feel her not saying what she was thinking. I should have asked her to say it out loud. In early December, I received a call from a woman named Diane, who said she'd been at my diner the previous Sunday with her husband and daughter, and that a police officer had approached their table and told them there had been a complaint about noise. She was confused because, she said, her daughter was 7 and had barely spoken above a whisper. I apologized, said I'd look into it, wrote down her number, and hung up. I found Morrison's name in the shift log. He had been in the diner that Sunday. I sat with the piece of paper for a long minute, then told myself that Diane might have misread the situation, that maybe the complaint had been real and had come from somewhere else. I put the paper in the drawer next to the register and told myself it was nothing. The drawer that, later, in a federal courtroom, a prosecutor would refer to as the beginning of the paper trail. That drawer sat closed for 3 weeks. The morning of January the 9th was clear and bitterly cold. The kind of cold that made the windows sweat on the inside and turned every breath outside into a small ghost. The winter light came through the front windows at a low angle that made everything look a little warmer than it was. We were at full capacity by 8:15, which was unusual for that early on a Sunday. Renee was double timing it between the kitchen and the floor, and I was helping bus tables in the middle section when the Henderson family came in. I noticed them immediately, the way you notice new faces after 11 years of regulars. The father was tall and broad-shouldered, wearing a dark wool coat, and carried himself with a quiet authority that had nothing to do with arrogance. The mother was beautiful in an understated way, the kind of woman who looked graceful without seeming to try. Their 2 boys, maybe 6 and 9, were already deep in negotiation about what they were allowed to order. The older one wanted the Belgian waffle. The younger one wanted pancakes with extra syrup and was making his case with a level of seriousness that made me want to smile. I remember thinking they looked like Sunday mornings were supposed to look. Renee seated them in booth 4, a good booth, window-facing, and took their drink orders. I watched the father help the younger boy out of his coat with the practiced patience of a man who had done it 10,000 times. He folded it neatly and laid it over the back of the seat, then removed his own coat. Through the inside pocket, I caught a brief glimpse of a hospital badge clipped to his lapel. I didn't think anything of it. I went back to the kitchen to check on an order that had been sitting too long under the heat lamp. Morrison came in at 8:47. I know the exact time because the security camera above the register shows it, and I have watched that footage more times than I can count. He came in alone, in uniform, and he did what he always did. Stood at the door for a moment and scanned the room. His eyes moved across the window booths. They stopped at booth 4. He stood there for 11 seconds, 11 full seconds of stillness in a busy, moving, noise-filled restaurant, before he walked to the counter and sat down. I was in the kitchen when Renee pushed through the swing door, pulled it shut behind her, and looked at me with an expression I had never seen on her face in 9 years. Not alarm, exactly. Something closer to the look a person gets when they have watched something terrible happen in slow motion and couldn't do anything to stop it. He asked them to leave? She said quietly, her voice low and careful. I looked up from the griddle. Who asked who to leave? Morrison. He walked up to the Henderson table and told them there had been a complaint, that another customer felt uncomfortable. He said they needed to vacate the premises immediately. The spatula in my hand was warm. I set it down on the pass-through very deliberately. They hadn't done anything. No, Renee said. They hadn't even gotten their drinks yet. The younger boy was still coloring on the paper placemat. Something cold moved through my chest, not quite shock, more like the sensation of a suspicion finally taking shape and weight. Like reaching into a dark drawer and feeling exactly what you feared was in there. Where are they now? I asked. Still at the table. The father asked Morrison to explain the complaint. Morrison told him that if he didn't leave voluntarily, he would be asked to leave by management. Renee paused, and something hardened behind her eyes. He said the management, like he owned the place. I untied my apron, folded it once, and set it on the counter. My hands were completely steady, which surprised me. The fluorescent kitchen light hummed. Somewhere out on the floor, a fork clinked against a plate. My voice, when I found it, came out flat and level and colder than I intended. He doesn't own the place, I said. I do. I pushed through the swing door and walked out into the dining room. The dining room was full. I want you to understand that, because it matters. Every booth occupied, every stool at the counter taken. Renee mid-step between the kitchen and table 9 with 2 plates balanced on her arm. Danny's radio playing something low and bluesy from behind the swing door, the smell of bacon and coffee so thick and warm it felt almost solid. And in the middle of all of it, Keith Morrison stood beside booth 4 with his thumbs hooked in his belt, looking down at a family of 4 who had done nothing except exist in a place he had decided they shouldn't be. I came through the swing door and crossed the floor in about 9 steps. I know those 9 steps better than I know most things. I can still feel the creak of the 3rd floorboard from the counter, the slight give in the linoleum near the service station, the precise moment when Morrison heard my footsteps and turned. He looked at me the way people look at something they expect to agree with them. Mr. Hayes, he said with a small nod, as if we were about to have a reasonable conversation. I was just explaining to these folks that there's been a complaint from another customer. No, I said. I didn't raise my voice. I stopped 2 feet from him and looked directly at him, and I said it again, quieter. No, there wasn't. The restaurant went very still. Not silent. The coffee was still percolating, the radio still murmuring. But still in the way a room goes still when everyone in it stops pretending they aren't listening. Morrison's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. Sir, I received a call. From whom? I asked. My voice stayed level, the way a road stays level right before the bridge washes out. Give me a name. Give me the table number. Tell me which customer complained, and I'll walk over and speak to them personally. He looked at me for a moment, and in that moment, I saw something shift behind his eyes. Not guilt, not yet, not that. More like recalculation. The kind of pause that happens when a man realizes the script he prepared for doesn't account for the scene he's actually in. He said slowly, "That information is confidential." In my restaurant, I said, there is no such thing as a confidential complaint that removes a paying customer from their seat. I turned to the family in booth 4 then, for the first time directly, and what I saw I will carry with me for the rest of my life. The mother had her hand over the younger boys, very gently, and she was looking at me with an expression that was not hope, exactly, but something more careful than that. The expression of someone who had learned not to assume. The father looked at me with a steadiness so complete it made my chest ache. He had been through this before. That was the part that hollowed me out. He had been through this before, and he had already prepared himself for how it was going to go. "You are welcome in this restaurant," I said to him, loud enough for everyone in the room to hear me. "Every booth in this place is available to any paying customer. That is the law, and it is the policy of Hayes's Diner. And it has been since my grandmother built this counter in 1961. Morrison stepped toward me, lowering his voice. "I'm going to ask you not to interfere with official police business." I looked at him. "Then show me the report number. Show me the call log. Show me any official record of any complaint." Another pause. Longer this time. Behind me, I heard the distinct sound of someone setting down a fork. "This conversation isn't over," Morrison said. He said it quietly, in that particular tone men use when they want to sound like they're keeping their composure. And both of us knew he was not keeping his composure at all. He walked out. The bell above the door rang once, sharp and clear, and he was gone. The room exhaled. Renee, who had been standing near table 9 with both plates still balanced on her arm for the entire duration of that exchange, finally set them down in front of 2 customers who appeared to have entirely forgotten they had ordered food. Old Mr. Patterson in booth 3 was looking at me with something that might have been pride. I turned back to the Henderson family. The younger boy had gone back to coloring his placemat, his small focused face bent over a half-finished drawing of something that might have been a dog. The father reached across the table and briefly touched his wife's hand. "Can I get you all some coffee while you decide?" I asked. "Yes," the father said. His voice was quiet and even. "That would be great. Thank you." I went back to the kitchen and stood at the counter for a full minute, with my palms flat against the metal surface, feeling the cool of it, breathing. Renee came in, pulled the door shut, and looked at me. "His body camera was on," she said. "I saw the red light." I looked at her. "The whole time?" "The whole time." That night I sat at my kitchen table until past 2 in the morning with a yellow legal pad and a cup of coffee that went cold without my noticing. I wrote down everything I remembered, in order, in as much detail as I could. The exact words, the exact positions, the exact sequence. Then I called my cousin Marcus, who was a civil rights attorney in Columbus. The phone rang 4 times before he picked up, his voice rough with sleep. I told him what had happened in 20 minutes flat. There was a silence on the other end when I finished. "Are there cameras in the restaurant?" he asked. Security cameras above the register and the front door, and Morrison's body cam was running. Another silence. Then, measured and careful, "Don't move anything. Don't delete anything. Don't talk to anyone from the department except through me. And call the Hendersons. Tonight if you can." I called them at 11:30. Dr. James Henderson, that was the hospital badge I'd seen. He was a cardiologist at Lakewood General. Picked up on the second ring. I don't think he had been sleeping either. I told him what I knew about the body camera. I heard him exhale very slowly. "My wife and I talked about filing a report," he said. "But we weren't sure. We didn't know if..." He stopped. "You were right to be uncertain," I said. "But I have a cousin who I think you should speak to. And I think there might be more documentation than either of us realizes." Marcus moved fast. Within 72 hours, he had filed a formal preservation request for Morrison's body camera footage, the diner security footage, and the department dispatch records from that morning. The department's response to the preservation request arrived in 4 days, and it was the document that turned a complaint into a case. The dispatch log showed no call from my diner that morning. No complaint had been recorded, no code entered, no supervisor notified. Morrison had walked into Hayes's diner on his own initiative, with no official basis, and had attempted to remove a black family from their seats, while his body camera recorded every word. That would have been enough. But Marcus, going through the footage methodically, found something else. Something that made him call me at 6 in the morning with a voice I had never heard from him before. Flat and precise, the way a person gets when they are being very careful not to let their anger make them sloppy. "There are 9 other businesses," he said, "in the last 14 months. 9 different incidents, all within Morrison's patrol zone, all involving black customers being asked to leave or being approached without cause. 3 of those businesses have cameras. 2 of them kept the footage. The metal taste of that information sat in my mouth for a long time after I hung up. The deposition hearing was held on a Tuesday morning in March, 8 months after the incident. I arrived 40 minutes early and sat in the waiting room of the federal building, watching dust move in the light from the high windows, turning my grandmother's ring over and over on my finger. A small gold band she had worn behind the diner counter for 30 years. I had worn it on my right hand since her funeral, a habit I'd never thought much about. It felt different that morning, heavier and also somehow right. Morrison's attorney tried 3 different versions of the same argument over the course of 2 days. The first was that Morrison had acted on a verbal complaint, never recorded per informal protocol. Marcus put the dispatch supervisor on the stand and asked her, point blank, whether any such informal protocol existed. She said no. The second version was that Morrison had used his discretion as a law enforcement officer in response to observable tension in the establishment. Marcus played 14 seconds of body camera footage, in which the Henderson family's younger boy hummed quietly to himself while coloring, the restaurant noise filling the background like a warm tide. The third version was that the incident was isolated and reflected no pattern of conduct. Marcus introduced the footage from 2 other businesses, the testimony of 11 witnesses, and the cell phone video that a customer named Patricia Weaver had quietly recorded from booth 6. A video that had been uploaded to social media the evening of the incident and had, by the time of the deposition, been viewed 4 million times. Patricia Weaver, it turned out, was a retired schoolteacher who had been eating her usual Sunday breakfast alone in booth 6 for 12 years. She had watched Morrison walk in, watched him approach the Henderson table, watched him stand over that family for 4 full minutes, and had made the decision about 20 seconds in to start recording. She later told Marcus that she had done it because she had known, in her body, in the way you know certain things without being able to explain them. She had known that what she was watching was going to matter later, and that the only way to make it matter was to make sure there was proof. The settlement conference lasted 3 sessions over 2 weeks. On the morning of the final session, I drove to the federal building in the same car I'd driven for 9 years, parked in the same spot I'd parked in the 2 previous times, and sat for a moment with my hands on the wheel and the engine off. The late October light came through the windshield flat and clear. I thought about my grandmother behind the counter in 1961. The lunch counter with 4 stools, the portable griddle, the neighborhood that came through the door and sat down and became something more than strangers. I thought about the Henderson boys coloring on their placemats. I thought about Dr. Henderson's face, that terrible steadiness. I went inside. The city settled for $2,300,000. Morrison was terminated from the force that same afternoon. The Internal Affairs Review that followed his termination opened an investigation into the 9 other incidents, which led to a federal civil rights investigation, which led, 14 months later, to Morrison entering a guilty plea on 3 counts of deprivation of rights under color of law. He was sentenced to 22 months in federal prison. His sergeant, who had known about 2 of the prior incidents and had taken no action, accepted a plea deal and resigned. The Henderson family used a portion of their settlement to establish the Henderson Equal Access Fund, which provides legal representation to discrimination victims who cannot afford attorneys. Dr. Henderson told a reporter that they had named it simply, without ceremony, because the name said everything that needed to be said. I kept the diner open. Renee is still there, 9 years becoming 10 and then 11, still carrying 4 plates and a milkshake on one arm and narrating whatever she's watching on television. The crack in the vinyl of Booth 7 is still there. I decided years ago it was staying. On the first Sunday of December, about a year after the settlement, James and his wife and their 2 boys came back. They sat in booth 4, same as before, and ordered what they'd never gotten to order the first time. Belgian waffle for the older boy, pancakes with extra syrup for the younger one, coffee for the parents, and a hot chocolate the younger boy did not technically need, but absolutely received. I brought it over myself. The boy looked up at me with the same seriousness he had applied to that placemat coloring 11 months ago and said with great gravity that it was the best hot chocolate he had ever had. "Good," I said. "Come back next Sunday." Same thing. I went back behind the counter and poured myself a cup of coffee. The morning light came through the front windows at the low winter angle, the one that made everything look a little warmer than it was. The restaurant smelled exactly the way it always had. Coffee and bacon and something older underneath. Something that had nothing to do with cooking. I turned my grandmother's ring once on my finger, and then I left it still. It fit exactly right. And for the first time in a long time, so did everything else.